Buckle in, chat. We're about to get some very, very interesting discussions going with a academic organizer and PhD trans advocate in Louisiana, Riley Valentine.
Hey, good morning.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, and I got my mic set up, so.
Perfect. All right, welcome on. Apologies that we weren't able to do this last week. Are you recovering okay? I know you were going through the ringer.
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
If you would like to introduce everyone to yourself, who you are, preferred pronouns, and what kind of work you do.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Riley Valentine. I use they, them pronouns. So I am an educator, I'm an activist, and I'm a writer. I'm also a first generation PhD. Most people in my family, I think my parents were the first ones to graduate college of their generation. They come from a very rural part of Louisiana, Lawtell. My grandparents only had an elementary school education, and I was raised very much so with like a leftist strain of Catholicism, with the idea that, we have a commitment to the world and to other people, and that's really informed and shaped a lot of my reality. And so I grew up with doing anti-war activism. And as when Occupy really struck out, that was kind of a moment where I became much more involved with broader organizing.
So, for a moment, I'd like to kind of pick apart what you were saying. Not pick apart, but kind of focus on what you're saying. You said you grew up in a more leftist, organized, community-based Catholicism in Louisiana. Could you expand a little bit on that? Because I also, having grown up in Louisiana in a Catholic community, didn't really find a bunch of that. Could you kind of expand on that some?
Yeah, so my parents actually, we went back and forth from Georgia to Louisiana. So in Georgia, it was much more pronounced, and that's where I spent a lot of my life before moving back to Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And there was a significant undocumented community in my neighborhood, and so as a result, we had a lot of nuns and priests who were informed by liberation theology. And that was a big basis for just my understanding of the world, and this belief that wealth doesn't make sense. We don't need wealth.
True.
The preferential option for the poor. In fact, the wealthy are the worst and kind of have the most obligations to all individuals, which has been really interesting, I think, being an educator and talking with students and telling them that, I've never dreamed of wealth. I've dreamed of equality, I've dreamed of justice, I've dreamed of all people feeling comfortable and all people being able to live a life worthy of, in which they are respected and have human dignity. So that was a core part of it. And when I moved back to Louisiana, I went to a church in Baton Rouge, where the first mass I went to, the priest said, America was founded on two sins, capitalism and slavery.
I mean, real.
And he was part of that there was a coordinated group of faith leaders who were starting to do an anti-racism task force with John Bell at the time. And he was a part of that. And so he would show up at protests, and he was great. He was hilarious.
That's cool.
I remember, I talked to him about being trans, and I was like, would I be welcome? Because I had left Catholicism, and I was like, would I be welcome in your community? And he was like, well, it's a sin for me to assume that I know you better than you know yourself. And that was a really transformative moment for me, of being like, oh no, there is a place in my faith for me, because with the leftist part, with the political part, that's something I always felt at home in. But there's a lot of transphobia. There's a lot of homophobia.
Of course.
Everyone knows this. And it was the first time I'd encountered an absence of that.
I'm going to do a little bit of trauma bonding with you about being from Louisiana for a moment. So, little personal story. My grandmother passed away last year, and at her funeral, her church had the priest had retired after so many years, and my grandmother, knowing her priest very well, and the new priest had been working in the area for a long time, but he took over the position, and he's from Nigeria. And at the funeral, he took note of how I was dressed and said I looked like I could be a priest. And I joked with him. I said I'm more of a ecumenical minded person. You know, I'm a big fan of like Jeremiah Wright, and the shock on his face that I knew what that was and who Jeremiah Wright was, but that was said in like this environment. I could kind of like psychically feel, oh, not something I hear often. Which brings me to the kind of I guess question: Do you sense that in Louisiana, because we have a very rich history of labor organizing, of like abolitionist movements in this state? Do you feel that is going back to its roots? Do you feel like there's a resurgence of that in the state, especially at this time when fascism and the collapse of neoliberalism is kind of bearing itself more apparently in front of people, that we're starting to see more and more of that? Because this state is often not talked about unless there is a hurricane that is close enough to Katrina that you can make comparisons.
Yeah, like unless there's a tragedy, in which case it's like, wow, look at y'all. Y'all are so resilient. Yeah. Now
Resilient, or damn, y'all are fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, I during COVID, you know, I got a job offer and I moved to Baltimore, and there's a frequent discussion of like, aren't you happy to be here? And I'm like, not actually, no.
Yeah.
I find that in the South, I'm wearing a shirt with the burning plantation that I got in Richmond. I find in the South.
Could you show that off? We love fit checks. That's sick. I love that. That's metal.
Yeah, it's great. I love Richmond, Virginia. I find that in the South, there's much more of a very strong commitment to justice because, you know, I mean, growing up, like at schools, like we would meet people and talk with people who had been in the civil rights movement. I had friends whose parents, like I had white friends whose parents were sharecroppers who participated. And I had friends whose parents were on the wrong side of history, whose kids were like, I never want to repeat that again. They were like, I don't want to be like my parents. I want to change the world that we live in and commit to a better reality and a better future for all of us. And I think I see that much more in the South. The further up north I kind of go, well, this is like the furthest up north I've gone, but I see a lot of almost like complacency, you know, and like Du Bois said, like where goes the South, so goes the nation.
Right.
And they want to ignore what's happening in the South because they kind of want to view ourselves as being like, oh, we're this blue bastion and we'll be safe. But meanwhile, like ICE has a facility that's being built en masse outside of Baltimore in a working class white neighborhood. Philly now has a massive, I think, multi-million-dollar ICE facility. And so I see sometimes the best organizing that I've ever experienced has been in the South. Atlanta had a robust community that I learned a lot from. Baton Rouge, New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans doing so much of just practical care. I remember the whole thing around fixing people's broken taillights because cops would always, you know, harass people for that. And then just taking those practical measures to then allow long-term organizing from there.
Yeah,
and
that's like clinics.
Yeah, exactly. Like I find that the South is better at that. And I think maybe because there is this mentality of like, we're in it for the long haul. This is a multi-generational, you know, struggle. And this is not an optional struggle. It's not something that you can just kind of step away from casually or dabble in, which sometimes seems the attitude that I see in the North and in blue states a lot, as though it's sort of something that they can participate in, but they can also opt out of, which isn't true at all.
A fair weather movement building.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, that's not successful at all.
It's actually, it kind of dovetails into one of the things I was very interested in talking to you about, which we can dive deeper into the work you do with the Louisiana Trans-Oral History Project. On the subject of like an oral history, this idea of a common stories and shared struggle in marginalized communities, be they POC, be they immigrant or indigenous people or the queer community, a shared oral history that keeps these like stories and a common struggle alive in these communities seems to be, like we were saying, more common in more rural regions of the country, because let's be honest, our education systems disincentivize the acknowledgement of those histories. Like, we don't have a acknowledgement of like the showdown in Desire, or Derringer Bridge massacre, or really like what happened during Katrina, or really like even like Huey P. Long. Like, people really don't even know who like Huey was. Whereas
I love him so much.
right. Like someplace like, let's say, you know, Chicago, they know about May Day. They know about Haymarket. It's memorialized, it's commemorated. There's an acknowledgement of that every year, but there's not necessarily something like that on a like municipal level or a statewide level in states like Texas or Louisiana or Arkansas, Tennessee, wherever. So it's more localized, it's more community focused. And I think that there is a power in that, but power also comes from building a structure that would, you know, solidify and calcify something like these shared histories and an acknowledgement of it. Which does bring us to the subject of your work with the Louisiana Trans Oral History Project. Would you tell me a little bit about like the genesis of that?
Yeah, so Sophie and I had been friends for a while, and she had a history of being a librarian and always being involved with the oral history projects, especially at LSU. And this kind of sort of spun out of that, of wanting to sort of document our history, because a lot of things that Sophie and I had been involved in and done, like work at the Capitol, was things of like when there were any cases coming up or bills around trans people, is showing up. And you can document is when you're someone there that you disagree with something. And so even if it gets voted in, there's still a record that people were there who dissented from that opinion. And so there was a big focus on the fact that we need to have some sort of record. And I think now more than ever, we're really seeing the importance of that with, you know, you don't need to do a Hirschfeld Institute. You don't need to do a book burning if you can do a digital burning.
Right.
So, so having these records is incredibly important because, you know, exactly what you're saying with like oral traditions. Growing up, I mean, I didn't know until I lived in Baton Rouge and had friends whose family members were in the bus boycott. I didn't know the first one was in Baton Rouge, and you know, my family was in Lawtell, so I knew like very specific, tiny little things there. And I teach that at school to my students, and they're like, wait, this happened in Louisiana? Why isn't this documented? And yeah, so we wanted to sort of start making that history, and I was really excited to be one of the first people participating in it. And Sophie's work has kind of grown and melded over that, and just the need for a record, I think, especially now, especially as, you know, we're getting cuts to any sort of research. I know I've talked to many of my friends who are scientists who are like, well, I'm gonna leave the country because I can't research vaccines. Right. And they're like, that's my entire job. I need a job. And if I can't get funding here, unfortunately, we live in a capitalist hellscape. And they're like, I'll move elsewhere.
So how does the project connect people who are going through the hurdles of being in a state like this, being non-binary, being trans, being a part of the LGBTQ community? How do they connect themselves to not only like the project, but to the history of queer struggle here?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a few ways to do it. I think sometimes for me, and maybe it's just because I grew up in a small town with a working single mom, mm-hmm. living in the library, is I find a lot of solace of just being able to read other people's stories and knowing that I'm not the only one who's experienced this. And to me, at least, like that kind of feeling of like community, even though many times it's been erased. One of my books that I did, Be Gay, Do Crime, when we were going through it, we were kind of discovering that there were all of these moments of queer history that had just been completely and largely erased from the record or from public knowledge. And having that, I think in many ways, just having that accessible mm-hmm. can be really meaningful.
So what are the current like hurdles in the accessibility?
Well, in many parts, it's honestly the digital divide.
Right.
Especially when you get to more rural communities, it's much harder to get internet access, and libraries aren't much easier. When I lived way out in far like rural Georgia, we had a bookmobile. And hopefully they could get the books that you wanted from the bigger library. But now, so you may not have access to a large library.
Right.
Now with hellish people such as Clay Higgins and Moms for Liberty trying to ban books, then it may be even more difficult for the librarians to get you books. And then with, internet access being really difficult to obtain, there's a lot of genuine material barriers.
Right. So, structurally, being this is even our cities are like kind of not cities. Like Baton Rouge is really just a big suburb. So, like structurally, getting access to that information, there are, like you say, digital book burnings all throughout the country. Could you, for the audience, kind of give an idea of like what that sanitizing and erasure of queer history in Louisiana looks like? Because there are similarities across states, but they can be slightly different. What does it look like here?
So I've been away for a moment, so like a few years. So now that I'm in Baltimore, they actually have the second largest, or maybe the county, second largest chapter of Moms for Liberty. It's the active removal, in my mind, of texts from public schools and public spaces. So then if you're not exposed to that in some way, and if, we're having sweeping and continuing legislation of like don't say gay bills, so then we're getting, it's increasingly harder for especially youth to access that. And that becomes, and it's all by design. None of this, people have been surprised with Project 2025, but this has been the Republican Party's end goal since Lord knows how long. Like, none of the things have been surprising. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I know that in our communications, you were saying you were doing some more research on Project 2025, but thank you for saying, like, this is not like one thing from the Heritage Foundation, that this is like as long as the Republican Party as it exists has been working towards. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's not surprising at all. Like as Austin's saying, like I'm looking at the way they're talking about disability, and they're like, we need to protect disabled people, but specifically we need to do that by ignoring trans people.
Right.
And we need to do that also by protecting infants who are disabled by abortion attempts strictly after birth. And it's like, well, that's not real. But that is what Justice Kennedy talked about when he wanted to overturn abortion, and I think Casey, when he talked about abortion causing like these injuries to people. And it's like, that's not true. It's a lie.
Yeah.
But these are just ongoing lies. Like, they're not.
Would a post-birth abortion injury just be attempted infanticide? Isn't that what that is?
I think so. I'm not quite sure.
Good
and
job.
They're like children who are disabled, and they throw in like genuine things of like needing more support for veterans with disabilities, but also they've been cutting funding to the VA. So that's also bullshit.
Of course. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, there's this book that I love by Melinda Cooper where she just she calls the Republican Party like neo-plantationists.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just blatant white supremacy.
I did a short documentary in 2024 on Angola with a friend of mine who's also a content creator and activist out in Kansas City, and we titled the video "Angola: The Modern Day Slave Plantation," and much of the structures that like lead to something like Angola are just the same, a relic of the antebellum South. I don't call any Democrat, especially in Louisiana, like a Democrat. I just refer to them as Dixiecrats because they're so far gone from like any like similarities to what people think Democrats are. The specifically on like the erasure of queer history, it would seem to me, and this is something I've observed and you kind of was alluding to a moment ago, that the former Confederate South states are the kind of limit test area for the GOP's project. We saw this with like anti-trans bills. We saw this with anti-immigration laws. We saw this with even like policing. How have you seen like anti-trans legislation and like digital book burnings kind of transcended through these states into like the national Republican Party conversation.
Yeah, I think like that's a great point of like the litmus test, because I remember one time John Bell showed up at the church I went to in Baton Rouge, and we had like a side conversation where I was like, so what are you doing for like queer people? And he was like, well, I tried to pass a bill, and then Landry tried to get me kicked out of office. Mm-hmm. and that was fascinating. It felt like I actually got to talk to to him as like a person. Mm-hmm. Because no one else was around, like there wasn't media, and that was something that I hadn't heard, that like he had tried to float it, and a worst person you know, Landry. Of course he tried, but he also tried to fucking impeach him for upholding basic COVID protections.
He sucks on so many levels, but on a personal level, I think his accent is fake. You get that too? Yeah. Right? Thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I've been saying for a while, he gussies it up for the cameras.
He does. I've never met, and like I have family members who like they learned English in like not middle school, Lord of mercy, elementary school, and they don't sound like that. I'm like, you're full of shit.
He 100% is. It's the kind of like hokey aphorism and like character that even someone like Lindsey Graham puts on. I know Lindsey Graham doesn't sound like little Gideon behind closed doors. It's crazy.
But at least he is funny. There was an interview where Lindsey Graham said he would rather vote for, I think it's Ted Cruz over Trump, because Trump is like getting shot in the face and Ted Cruz is like taking poison. At least there's antidote. But then, he sided with Trump. But it was really funny.
Yeah. It is unfortunate that our fascism is so like satirical in its attempts to like posture as strong. It's very bizarre.
There are very funny moments, like the Trump's political ad with DeSantis, after DeSantis said he would eat. Yeah. That was it's objectively very funny.
Yeah, like him reading through for the first time his statement on the Supreme Court decision yesterday, being like, I am so good at reading languages, words, so good at them. Incredible.
It's pretty remarkable. There's a lot of times where I'm like, I feel like I need to laugh so I don't have a heart attack.
Sometimes I just wonder, like, are these actually our oppressors? Like, is this real? Did I black out in 2020 and I haven't woken up since?
It kind of feels, it feels bad. It feels bad to just be like, this is so dumb. Yeah. Previous fascists were so serious, and they're just so fucking dumb and silly.
I like to push back on that, because like they were just as stupid and methed out like in the Nazi regime, but they were stupid in the context of what was a ridiculous person like in the 40s,
Yeah, no, that's fair. I know I found out recently, like 2 days ago, that Mussolini apparently was anti-pasta. Because he had to, he wanted rice, because he was
gluten
like
intolerant.
No, apparently he was like, at the time they would need to ship in, maybe like semolina flour or something for pasta, and so he would. Yeah, I learned this 2 days ago there was an article on theconversation.com, which is like a lot of academics will like kind of write just things for like everyday people, and so I'll go on there and be like, let me learn something.
Okay.
So yeah, Mussolini.
Well, no wonder they posted him up in front of a gas station. Okay, that and other stuff. To kind of like circle back to what we were talking about. Sorry, that was a weird transition.
Yeah.
Speaking of transition, funny enough, could you kind of give us some of what the effort through the Oral History Project is trying to like connect in our history here? Because we have a lot of stories of like queer struggle that oftentimes we see in areas that also had like large labor struggles in major metropolitan areas. What's some of our history here in Louisiana for queer struggle?
Especially in New Orleans. New Orleans had one of the largest gay bars that ended up being burnt to the ground, and that history was erased entirely. Yeah, so that was significant. And then in New Orleans especially, there are many cases of people being prosecuted for presenting in ways that did not align with their sex assigned at birth, and also using names that didn't align with their gender assigned at birth. And within Louisiana, there's also instilled cultural aspects of like gender bending. So I do the Corrida de Mardi Gras, the very traditional Mardi Gras, and there is a role where someone must always be in drag as an old woman. There must always be drag.
Yep.
But with drag bands, you wouldn't necessarily know that there are these queer elements of culture that are interwoven throughout. And Sophie really wanted, in the Louisiana Trans History Projects, also really wanted to highlight that there's also joy, because so much of history is about tragedy and horror and all of these things, but there also is joy, and that needs to also be recognized. And because if we just focus on infinite tragedy, for me, it becomes hard to almost like be able to have the energy to keep on doing things, because it just becomes muddling, almost like get into a depression spiral that I can't get out of.
I mean, there has to be stories of triumph just as much as there is stories of tragedy, because it's two ends of the same coin, I suppose. I remember our mutual friend, RK Monkey in the chat, when we were driving back from an event that the two of us were going to. RK was describing like some of the academic education that she was getting, and the stories that people in Louisiana queer spaces were sharing about how when the descriptor of trans people had started to shift from the former descriptor of like transsexual. Some older, elder queer folk preferred that, but whatever. How when it was being proposed to add the T to the LGBT, that one of RK's mentors said, there is no question. There is no question as to whether or not they are added into this group, despite them being a greater target, and you thinking that might make a bigger target of you.
Yeah.
They are part of this. And that level of solidarity, like growing up in a very conservative area, like solidarity was absent. There was no sense of like community. There was no sense of like solidarity along different marginalized lines. That didn't exist. And growing up, developing and like meeting and experiencing like queer spaces, that is where I felt the first bit of solidarity. And this is like in Baton Rouge of all places. Like that is like queer bars and queer spaces is where I found solidarity like in its truest form, right? Urvashi Vaid said that. Yeah, that's right. She backed up my gay grandma who was fighting to add the T. There you go. Yeah, that was the story. Urvashi Vaid.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, like, and that was not until like my early 20s, right? Like, I didn't like come into my like sexuality as like a bisexual person until like in my mid 20s, and it was only having like those spaces, right? And in the most unexpected ones, like, I didn't realize how much I rep this state until I started doing this and like sharing stories from here and like describing to people like what struggle is in areas of the country like this. Have you found something similar? I think you kind of described that earlier.
Oh, yes. I have giant Louisiana flags in my classroom. I have
a Mardi Gras tree.
Yeah. I have, I do a lesson on Corée de Mardi Gras with my students to be like, this is what I do. I have a giant sign from a protest from Louisiana that says trans people belong in Louisiana.
That's right.
And I've just always, I'm always repping the South because I think that the South is the part of the country that gives me the most hope. Seeing people coalesce, seeing people come together, and an actual living an ongoing commitment to fighting fascism consistently is something that I find really invigorating. Even when you're surrounded by objectively like awful, some people are horrible. And the thing that I prefer about the South is at least I know who those people are.
Right.
Up here, sometimes I'll talk to folks and they'll have fun haircuts and be going to like the same spots I'm going to, and then it turns out that they actually are like Trump supporters, but they're like, we're not a white supremacist. I'm like, but
yeah, they're y'alternative.
Yeah, and I'm like, but if I was in the South, at least I would know. I would know who you were, and so I would be able to identify people who I should not support. And I think that's part of why I agree, like in the South, I find it easier to develop and find spaces with solidarity. It's so much easier to identify people in community Whereas up here, I feel like I'm usually on like almost like my back foot, and folks assume because I'm from the South that I will agree with them and their own perspectives, and they're very confused about Southern leftists. They're very shocked by that.
Yeah, because they're the most leftist.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been kind of like stewing on something, and maybe you can like resonate with this, but I do 100% agree that there is a different form of organizing and like solidarity that exists in regions of the country like this. And there's an interpretation that both from like the broader national perception of this region and internally here from like a Democratic Party, defenders, that it is a long project, but any gains made in like flipping things blue is preferable to the, I suppose, upending of like, why is that preferable when there are examples of when like we do have a Democratic governance, or we do have Democrat like reps and like pockets of Democratic representation where these struggles are still happening. I have been trying to, process all of that organizing that we see in like Atlanta with Stop Cop City, where we see it in New Orleans with a very like decentralized but broad coalition of different organizations, and in Houston, Texas, where there is a bunch of different marginalized organizations that are fighting for immigrants, they're fighting for housing, they're fighting against like climate gentrification. I don't think that there is a future for the Democratic Party in the South. I genuinely don't. I think that there is a future for the a different like organizational structure that is apart from the Democratic Party. If we're talking electoral politics, like something is like stewing underneath all of it that is looking to be articulated into something different.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I always viewed voting as almost kind of like harm reduction, and I never started voting until I moved to Baton Rouge, and there was, because when you vote in Louisiana, everything is a constitutional amendment, and there was a constitutional amendment about juries and how juries would operate, and that was like the first time I was voting, because the Democratic Party, everywhere I've lived, they've been terrible, and I have plenty of family members who had been Republican because of the Democrats. Like, my mama was born in 1951, so she identified the Democratic Party with the party of white supremacy, so which is really interesting. And she ended up flipping parties, but something I think of as conversations with my family is where they're like, the Democrats have never helped us. And they're like, the Democrats have never changed. Like, the Democrats have also helped to sell our coastlines and contribute to environmental racism and classism and the destruction of our state. Why should we find our hope with them? And I think that's a good point.
What you're describing there, you're more of an academic, so you're probably not as like plugged into like online discourse as a space like this is. But there was a conversation between this like 23-year-old Adam Mockler and Hassan Piker the other day, where there was a rift in a comment he made on a podcast about how if it was a decision between Gavin Newsom and JD Vance in an election, that Hassan would vote third party, because at that point, like, it's over for like any kind of push towards a left candidate, right? And Mockler was making that argument that, well, it's a harm reduction, and I am of the mind that like harm reduction is only effective when it is reducing harm.
Yeah.
Like, a slow bleed versus a gaping wound is still bleeding, especially to the people who are closest to being harmed by it. I look at the body politique in a state like this, where people have to, they have to present differently in public. They have to make these considerations. Even in some parts of like the major cities of Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Lafayette, they still have to make those considerations. It's not, despite New Orleans being part of the gay triangle and the whole state doing very gay shit during Mardi Gras,
Yeah.
It's not that open. It's still very puritanical and it's very reactionary. I think that there is a desire to be more open. I think that certainly is an undercurrent in the state, but there is a genuine and albeit legitimate fear of political reprisal and retaliation from the government. I'm constantly frustrated with this notion that we can incrementalize our way out of oppression.
Yeah, voting will never, like, my most recent book is about how, like, the law won't save us. The people I've always, like, found voting for to be the most important have been judges. Like, the judges that I voted for back when I was in Louisiana were some of the judges that helped postpone the trigger ban. I think voting can be selectively very useful.
Sure.
Voting for presidents, not particularly.
Right.
And voting in Maryland has been kind of bullshit. Like, my representative, he is a Democrat who's like, I love queer people, and then voted he voted with the NDAA that had all the anti-trans measures.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I don't believe in you. I will vote to keep funding my libraries, which we have to do in Maryland. Like, in Baltimore City, you have to vote every single, like, election cycle to fund your libraries and the public museums, because there's public museums here. It's incredible. But if we don't vote for it, then it's like, do they go away? Like, it's wild.
Jesus Christ. I do want to, I have so much to say on that, but like, I do want to kind of like go back. You were saying you were working on this book that you had written, The Law Won't Save Us. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's called The Coercive Power of the Law, which is a very academic title. So my friend and I, he's a lawyer, and he works with Lawyers for Good Governance, doing especially like focusing on trans civil rights law. And we'd worked before on projects like Be Gay Do Crime, and we looked at how the Republican Party was modeling their shit off of Erdogan and like all of these things. And we wanted to sort of push back against like the liberal narrative that like the only thing we need to do is vote. And especially because I feel like every time there's like, I think especially I hear it most now with the second Trump like election. Or
the courts are going to have something to say about this.
Yeah. They're just like, we got to do it. And it's like, well, that's not really useful. So we wanted to look at how the law has failed for protecting people in terms of, we looked at disability, abortion, book bans, and then trans healthcare.
Okay. And
looking at how all of these things, the law is, like, it's not that the law is useless, because the law can be helpful, I depended on Social Security, disability to live,
right.
And that is legislated. So it's not to say that we shouldn't do anything with the law, but it is to say that the thing that's going to save us is not the law. It's right. Other people, and it's our communities. And so we looked at how, like, especially with limits on gender-affirming care, all of those things have been undermined recently by the passage of Dobbs. So all of these sort of structures and, like, white supremacist reactions to any sort of progress have been, they all go together. It's not as though, I remember talking with some folks in the Working Class History Project, and they were like, the poem, once they came for these groups of people and then they stopped.
Yeah.
And it's, they're using all of these legislative tools and judicial tools to undermine everyone's rights and regulations. And with Project 2025, they're like, we need to protect disabled people, but to protect disabled people, we need to not protect trans people.
Right. Of course, that works out.
Yeah, makes complete sense. Because there's no disabled trans people.
Right.
We don't exist.
It actually, what you're describing here reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine who does work in the Democratic Party. She spearheads the LGBTQ outreach committee in the Democratic Party, trying to do what she can, right? A long time ago, I had a conversation with her on stream, and she described how at the center of every intersection of marginalization, there is trans existence. Whether you are like a minority background, whether you are an immigrant, whether you are disabled, whether you are working class, whatever it is, that like there is a trans person who's intersecting with all of those. And when there is true like abolition for trans people and like the oppression that they experience, they won't have anyone left. Like they're still going to attack people, but freeing trans people from oppression is freeing every single line of marginalization. Which, like, certainly there are arguments to be made about, like, you can say that with every group, but most starkly in our current era is a maligning and marginalizing of trans existence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I forget if it was Roberts or Alito. It was well written, so I know it wasn't Kavanaugh.
He loves beer.
Yeah. Oh God. Gorsuch actually writes beautifully on Indigenous rights.
Really?
He will. Yeah. He has always been a really strong, significant, and protector of Native rights. And his writing on the need to protect ICWA is actually, it's probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever read from a justice. And he goes through like all of the white supremacist action. But anyway, he's an interesting person as like a so it's either Roberts or Alito, but they said that gender affirming care is an ideological science in the same way that we see with Buck v. Bell and eugenics. And it's the first time that Buck v. Bell has been referenced contemporarily, and it's good law. And it's very frightening. That's a very frightening connection to start to make, is the idea that eugenics and trans people, that were like somehow intermeshed. And we're now seeing, for the Stonewall Monument, the Park Service removing the T. And when, like, a few months ago, a lot of the conservative gays were posting about how me and Zayn and a bunch of other folks, we're not a part of the community, and the community is actually the LGBs. And the T's were doing something else. And now that bisexual is also being removed from, like, the Stonewall, I know. Who could have foreseen this?
It's funny you say that, because I think it was, who was it, chat, that had like a 5-minute diatribe the other day about how like everyone is saying they're bisexual now. What happened to straight people? Why are people identifying as bisexual if they're not fucking? It's like, oh, it feels like nobody at Fox News is fucking, at least not consensually, so what's up with y'all?
Incredible. I want to know who said that. That's hilarious.
It's somebody will remember it. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Will Kane or something.
It reminds me, like, the discourse right now reminds me of, remember when, like, Obergefell was, like, coming up in gay marriage, and they were like, gay people are pedophiles and abusers. Now they're saying the same shit. Yeah, it's the same shit, different group of people. And, trans people, especially trans people of color, like, and trans women of color, have been, the most at risk of experiencing violence. And so this further, like, this hyper visualization then makes it so that one group of the community is very visible and that they're a threat, which is very, very frightening.
Yeah. I actually, funny you mentioned like the Obergefell, the gay panic. I actually went over a old piece of propaganda the other day on the stranger danger connection to homophobia, and how like the kind of almost, I don't know what a word to put to it is other than like minstrelly depictions of stranger danger, like who are the strangers. It was very like almost a caricature of like what you would think like a gay man in like the 1950s looks like, right? Like
it's a little Light in the Loafers, perhaps.
Yes, Light in the Loafers. A friend of Dorothy. Like it is very much a progression of the same propaganda, because I often talk about how the like cultural Marxism narrative that was prominent with like the rise of the IDW, the intellectual dark web, in 2015-ish, went from cultural Marxism to Antifa, to BLM, to CRT, to DEI, DEIA, and now just woke. Like, it's a reduction of language, which I'm a big fan of Umberto Eco's 14 Points of Fascism. Like, that is like the number 14. It's newspeak. It's just a reduction of language down to like the lowest common denominator, where you're just projecting emotion onto a single word, and it could mean anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. God, I love Umberto Eco's 14 points because I think it's just I love when he's like, there's gonna be fascists.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be jackboots. And they're not gonna say, like, to quote him, I think he says, like, they're not gonna say let's reopen Auschwitz. They're gonna say some other shit. But
Yeah.
it's all gonna fit these same categories.
Yeah, there
And
needs
it
to be
does.
security zones.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things where it's like essential to fascism is machismo and this very strict like this strict idea of like what sexuality is okay and what forms of like sexual expression and gender expression are okay.
Yeah.
And anything that's seen as feminine is like that's a problem. Which is funny since they were like all the gay Nazis who were then shocked when they were
Yeah.
It's amazing how when people, align themselves with fascists and they are hated by fascists, and then they become shocked when the fascists come after them.
Yeah, it's Umberto Eco, Riley in the chat. 14 points by who? It's Umberto Eco's 14 points of or fascism. You are dash fascism. It's like the psychological id, which I've shown upwards of like 2,000 times on this show. Like every time I'm trying to explain, I'm like, all right, we're bringing up Umberto.
It's great. I teach it to like 15-year-olds, and they're always just like, oh my God, what is this?
I know. My favorite part is whenever I am explaining this to a conservative, when I will bring up like, okay, well, like, you want me to define a fascist here? Like, let's go through like the psychology of a fascist. And they're like, well, you could describe any liberal that way. And I'm like, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Why is that, I wonder?
Yeah, it's almost like fascism is kind of, it's everywhere. Anyone can be a
Yeah, it's kind of like, capitalism in crisis, Weird.
Yeah, so strange.
I do think that it's good to bring up what you were saying about the like puritanical like structures and enforcements of a very rigid binary of like a gender and sexual expression. Because to go back to what we were saying, this state's hella gay. There's so much. Like, you can't tell me that James Carville has never seen one up close when he's dressing in like LSU merch that much. Of course he has.
I love him so much.
I can't stand James Carville.
I just find him hilarious.
God.
Maybe it's I like the SNL characteristic of James Carville more than I like actual James Carville.
I was working at a Starbucks when I was like 18, 19, and James Carville like just appeared in front of me in the line at the Starbucks. And I had just the night before, this was like when I was still trying to figure out what to like the media to engage with, and I had seen like a Bill Maher episode with him on it like the night before.
Oh no.
And immediately I like on my little microphone I was like, I need a shift supervisor to come to the counter because I am not gonna be able to contain myself.
Yeah, not Lord knows, not anyone who's been on Bill Maher.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think that the way that this state has a lot of expression of gender and sexuality is very, it's very queer coded, and like not even in like you say that you're straight and yet here you are wearing the the feathery thing that we wear during Mardi Gras, but in something like deeper, something deeper that connects the different like Cajun Creole cultures and like the language that we use. We even use like unironic gender neutral descriptors for people like Sha and like y'all. We use a lot of different like language that reminds me of expressions that I've seen in queer spaces. I don't know if that's something that you've picked up on as well, but I think that this is an area of the country that with the right organizing can be a bastion for queer people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, my cousin was telling me like about how, in the Cuerie de Mardi Gras, le Mardi Gras is the word for each person, and that's a gender neutral word. Mm-hmm. There is no, like, unlike a lot of other nouns in French, there's no gender for that. Everyone is this kind of, and the costumes are baggy and very androgynous. Yeah, it's like a whole thing. And I find that, spending like part of my life in Georgia, part of my life in Louisiana, and returning, is a lot of things that were like considered gendered norms outside of Louisiana were kind of, or were like non-existent in my family. Like outside of Louisiana, it was very gendered, the idea that like only women cook, but in my family, it was very common for men to also cook. So things like that of just being like, I don't understand why these ideas of gendered spaces being neatly segregated, they didn't exist like that growing up in any capacity.
Yeah, like a fado-do. Like that's very much an ungendered space.
Yeah, exactly.
For
and
people
so
who don't know what a fado-do is, that's like after the kids are put down to sleep and you have a party.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so great. Yeah, I remember like some of my cousins who are men like sewing and things like that.
Yes.
And when I would be in Georgia, they'd be like, what is happening in your family?
Yes, like I do cosplay and I like make all of my I sew everything, and my wife cannot sew to save her life. She's the prop maker, and I'm like the seamster. I'm the tailor.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at it, which I wish I was better. I guess maybe that'll be my Lenten thing as start learning a task.
Are you familiar with the underground up and coming music artist Damage?
No.
No, she is from New Orleans, and she just put out a new song, and I wanted to. You reminded me of something that is in the song. Where was it? Chad, what's the name of Damage's new song? I know it's damn it. I feel like I should have prepared for this. What's the name of the new one? RK? Oh, In the Image of God is the name of the song.
Ooh.
Yeah, and there is a quote in it. Let's see. There's a quote at the end of it. They kind of like interplace like the rap lyrics with a kind of mantra. Mm-hmm. Let's see, where is it?
Oh, I see someone, saying, Feidodo does mean to go to sleep, because you're telling the small children, like, go to sleep so you can go do things.
Oh, thank you. You got the link for it. I'll just read the transcript. In it, there's kind of like I don't know where it came from, but I'll read it for you. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Trans people represented some of the most robust spiritual leadership alive. What is transness but the practice of saying out loud in public, I have faith in something that you do not. See yet, I have a knowing in me that is deep and felt, and you will spend your entire life trying to disprove the thing that I know precious and vital within. In fact, you will try to kill me for it. This belief in my divinity, this practice of my sacredness, and yet trans people make that revolutionary choice to continue showing up, which is the ultimate form of love and mercy. We have to go through our own internal baptism, I like that term, cry so many tears to realize that actually everything we were taught was wrong and pathological and broken. That is our godliness. What an incredible quote to put in there.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yes.
I need to listen to that later.
Yeah, that's Damage. The E in Damage is spelled with a 3. That's how you know it's edgy.
Ooh.
Yeah, she's great. She's great.
Are you bringing back Leet Speak? Is this what's happening now?
Yes, that was my thought too. No one calls it Leet Speak anymore. I feel like you and I dated ourselves right there with calling it Leet Speak, but whatever.
Yeah, the ye old internet.
Yeah. So to get back to kind of like the ethos of this conversation, how can one who is listening to this bring their own version of this project to their communities?
Yeah, I would say. Oh, excuse me. Just seeing the thing about Leet Speak in the chat. Oh my god, hilarious.
L337.
It's coming back. I would say, like, try to weave those oral histories in. Try to document them. Ask people for their own stories and make your own archive. Help contribute to the development of an archive. I was speaking to some librarians who were saying that something that they've been doing is creating and sort of cultivating, making copies of just, creating a digital archive on separate computers, you know what I mean? And, well, Now it's so expensive because of AI. Thanks, AI. I got my
Yeah,
computer.
thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Waiting for that bubble to pop.
Me too. My rig is from like 2017, and I'm like, okay, just listening to the fans, hoping it doesn't. Now the materials are $1 million.
I'm currently on my bad computer because I have had to, for the last like 3 months, try and get my my actual working better computer, and
God bless.
Not been fun. I got hard drives or RAM sticks right before the prices went up, and turns out it wasn't the RAM sticks. So now I can just like do a RAM stick spread whenever I want because I got them before the price hike.
Look at you. You're basically a millionaire now.
Got your whole house on my fucking wrist right here.
Yeah. So that may be much more difficult to do now, but I think continuing and in our small communities, making sure that we preserve our own archive is really important. And Lord knows it's expensive and very, very difficult. But yeah, RK has a great offer.
I've offered this to Riley and Sophie early in the project, but anyone in chat who wants to have trainings on oral history for their community or org can hit me up. There you go.
Yeah, because honestly, we're going to independently need to help protect those in sort of a decentralized fashion, because at this point in time, I don't know that how comfortable I would feel with only centralized oh Lord, what's the word for that? Centralized collections of these data, simply because, I mean, the government is becoming increasingly openly fascist. So I think the more decentralized we can have and the more widespread we can have these collections, the better and safer and more long-lasting they will be.
I mean, that's what power and autonomy are, right? That's the taking back of your own history. It's having it be owned by those decentralized communities.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, and not only sharing some some stories from a fellow Louisiana head, but you coming on and letting people in the community who want to be an ally or who are a part of the LGBTQ community bring this back home.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it was so nice to be on, and it's always nice to talk with other fellow Louisianians.
That's right.
Who are leftist.
I was messaging, ironically, Damage, the artist, last week, and saying like, "Hey, appreciate your work. There's not many people who are like putting in that hard work, publicly, but we recognize real."
Oh yeah, RK saying plug my shit. Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky.
Okay.
Yep. Riley Val at Blue Sky. Pretty simple. And I am easily emailable on my website. So if anyone would like free copies of anything that I've ever done, I will always provide free copies. So anything you want that I have done, if you would like a copy, I will give you a copy.
I need you to confirm, because like you're doing the Cajun French, which is like more credibility than I can claim. Tomatoes, gumbo.
No.
Thank you, Riley, for coming on today. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day, and thank y'all so much.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. That was a great combo. If you threaten to put your tomatoes in your gumbo, okay, now you're not just being like anti-Cajun, now you're being transphobic, okay?